Hello everyone, my name is Carmen Euro and this is my family genogram presentation. This presentation will include a copy of my family genogram, a family photo of my immediate family. I wanted to share with you all what we actually look like, some cultural and religious quick facts about both sides of my family, some pride and shame issues that we have experienced on both sides, personal development and reflections, and the professional impact my culture and religious upbringing have had upon me. Here you will see a copy of my family genogram. On the right side is my paternal side, which is my father's side, and then on the left side is my maternal side, and that's my mother's side. And I will go ahead and start with my mother's side of the family. Her parents' names are William and Lily. We actually do not call William at all. We called him Bootsy, so he was known as Papa Bootsy my entire life. He is actually deceased. As you can see, he did struggle from prostate cancer, which resulted in his death. My grandma Lily is still living. They were born and raised in Muncie, Indiana, and that is where she currently resides. They had 4 children. You'll see here Lonnie, Jolene, Carlitha, and Troy. All children are currently married with the exception of my Uncle Troy. He was divorced many years ago. He has a lot of struggles with drugs and alcohol, which ultimately resulted in his divorce from my Aunt Kelly. There are some kids that I've listed here, some of my cousins. My Aunt Jolene is married to a man named Benny. They share 2 children, Brandon and Brian, who are both also married. Brian does have 2 children, and Brandon is expecting a child currently. My Uncle Troy has 2 children as well. They're named Troy Jr. and Kyla. They are very distant from the family because of their father's drug use, so they don't really talk to a lot of us. My Uncle Lonnie and Uncle Rita, they don't share any biological kids together. However, my Uncle Lonnie does have a few kids. It was just impossible for me to fit them on this genogram, but there are some kids that come from my Uncle Lonnie. Moving on to my father's side, we have my grandpa, whose name's Simon. Again, we did not call him Simon. We just called him Papa Rick. So we have Papa Rick, and then we have my grandma Mildred. Both of them are deceased. My Papa Rick died of emphysema. He was a very heavy smoker, and ultimately just got really sick and was on oxygen for the majority of what I can remember of life. My grandma Mildred was a severe alcoholic, and she also suffered from dementia. So just as she got older and her dementia got worse, she passed away. As you can see, I have the line of physical abuse. To my knowledge and from what I've been told, when my father was younger, there was some physical abuse that went on inside that house. My grandma Mildred was a stay-at-home mom, and my Papa Rick, he worked in factories for their entire life. They had a total of 8 children. Richard, Dorothy, Linda, Simon, Herman, Larry, Leslie, and Timothy. There is some continued drug and alcohol use in my Uncle Simon and my Uncle Herman. My Uncle Simon, who we would call Uncle Dickie, has passed away from his drug use. All other siblings are still living. There are a million children on this side of the family that I would call cousins. Again, I was not able to fit them on here, and some of my cousins on this side I personally just do not know. They live in different states. Parents were never together, so there's a lot of separation on this side of the family from my cousins and my aunts and uncles for the most part. Going back to my mom's side, both my grandparents were factory workers, so they spent their whole life working in factories. And my Papa Bootsy, which you will see here as William, he was also in the military. You will see my parents listed on here. You'll see Carlitha, that's my mother, and my father, his name is Lawrence, but we all call him Larry. They only have 2 children, myself and my brother Ryan. Ryan is actually engaged and going to be married soon. He lives in Chicago. And then there is myself. I am not married. And then you will see my daughter here at the bottom, and her name is Madison, and she is currently the youngest person on both sides of all of our family. She is 4 years old. Here you will see a photo of my immediate family. So on the far right, you will see my father. His name is Lawrence, but we all call him Larry. He is a retired educator. You will see my mother on the opposite side. She is also an educator, however, she's not retired, and her name is Carletha. Almost directly in the middle, you will see my brother. He is an attorney who currently lives in Chicago. You will see myself standing next to my mother, and then you will see my daughter named Madison. So now we will talk about some cultural and religious facts of both sides of my family. So we will actually start with the Ural side of the family, which is my father's side. Earlier this year, my father did an Ancestry.com report, and he discovered that his family originated from West Africa. So that is some news that we recently just got this year. They all currently were born and reside in Indianapolis, Indiana, and then there are a few extended family members that live in Mississippi. So on this side of the family, we would travel back and forth from Indianapolis to Mississippi for different family events and family reunions. My father and his siblings, they grew up in the AME Church, and that stands for African Methodist Episcopal Church. They actually attended Bethel AME Church, which is located in downtown Indianapolis. It has recently been demolished and turned into a hotel, but it is the same church that Madam C.J. Walker attended. The church does still exist, however, it's just in a different location in Indianapolis. If you would ask someone on that side of the family to kind of describe their belief systems, they would probably say this quote that I have here: God our Father, Christ our Redeemer, the Holy Spirit our Comforter, humankind our family. So that just kind of describes what denomination and what church they were brought up in. They were considered, low socioeconomic status. My grandmother was a stay-at-home mom, so there was no income coming in from her. And my papa, he was a factory worker, so he brought in the majority of the income. He managed all the finances and paid all the bills in that household. Moving on to the Johnson side of the family, which is my mother's side, their family origins are unknown. There is a reason for that, and we will kind of get into that on the next slide. They currently reside in Muncie, Indiana, and there are a few of them in Mississippi as well. We never traveled to Mississippi for this side of the family, so we just travel from Muncie to Indiana, which is maybe a 30 to 45 minute drive. They grew up in the Apostolic Church, and when I asked some of my aunts and uncles and my mom about what they were taught, religious wise, they all said we were forced to attend church. So it was nothing that they wanted to be a part of. However, their mom and dad forced them to attend their whole lives. They were considered low to middle social economic status. Both my grandma and my grandpa did work, and they were factory workers, which was a very common job around the time that they were living in Muncie. Now we will talk about some pride and shame issues that have been experienced through my family on both sides. I will start with my father's side of the family, the Ural family. One of the major things my father's side of the family, my grandparents instilled in their children was a strong work ethic. Even though my grandmother was a stay-at-home mom, it was not acceptable for any of them to grow up and not have a job, and that included the women in the family. So all of them had a job very, very early on in life and maintained those jobs either currently or until their retirement. Everyone on that side of the family has a really, really strong faith system. They grew up in the AME church, and the majority of them stayed in the AME church to this day, and it's something that they continue to pass down to their own children. And money management skills was very important in the household. My grandfather paid all the bills, and he took it upon himself to teach budgeting, taxes, all of the money things you need to know about life. He taught to all of his children so that they could be financially stable when they did grow up. On my mom's side of the family, they also were taught a strong work ethic. Both my grandparents were factory workers, and all of my aunts and uncles, they started working at a very early age. However, on this side of the family, education was valued. So everybody on that side of the family did go to college. So after college, they all started their careers. We have realtors, we have educators, we have factory workers still in that side of the family, and they all have at least a bachelor's degree. On my father's side, education was not really valued. So there was only one person on there that furthered their education, which we will discuss here in a minute. Also, on my mom's side, there's a very strong emotional connections in that family. Everyone is really close. We do have a couple of members that are not as close to us, but for the majority, everyone is really close. Everyone keeps in contact. We still all celebrate holidays and the same traditions together. Going back to my dad's side of the family, some of the shames that I just pointed out were domestic violence. Again, my grandfather was very abusive towards my grandmother. According to my father, during the time when they were children, that was just a common theme in the black households, is that the mom would not work and the father would be abusive and control everything in that house. There's also a significant amount of drug and alcohol abuse. Again, when we talked about my genogram, we talked about my grandmother's alcohol abuse and both of my uncles' drug and alcohol abuse. There is a lot of emotional disconnect on that side of the family. There are several people that are not close, several people that do not talk to each other. There's low support on that side of the family. They don't really value education. My father was actually the only person of his 8 siblings to go off and go to college, and because he decided to go in the educational route, his parents at one point actually did abandon him. So he left the family home and went to live with his aunt on another side of the town, where he was able to continue his education, go to college, get a master's degree, and just become the man that he is today. There's also no mental health awareness or buy-in on this side of the family. Their main thing was, if you were sick, you would go to church and you would pray about it. There was no such thing as mental illness to them, and it just did not exist. And the only cure was to go to church and to ask God to cure you or ask God for forgiveness. On my mother's side, you'll also see that there was no mental health awareness or no buy-in. It was just something that was never spoken about. If anybody had any emotional struggles, any psychological struggles, it was almost just ignored on this side of the family, so no one ever spoke about it. There's also some drug and alcohol abuse, just solely in my uncle, who is still currently struggling with that drug and alcohol abuse. And there's also a lot of secrecy on this side of the family. On my genogram, I listed that my mom's parents were my Papa Bootsy and her mother, Grandma Lily. However, I did not find out until I was an adult that my mother's father is actually not who I knew as my grandpa growing up, and that all of her siblings have had different fathers. So my Papa Bootsy was actually none of our biological grandfather. He was our step-grandfather, if that's how you want to call it. We never knew my mom's biological father. We never knew my aunts and uncles' biological fathers. It's something that is not spoken about. It is like the biggest kept secret within that side of the family, and I don't think it'll ever not be a secret on that side of the family. Growing up, I would definitely say that my maternal side had a more dominant role in my development as a child and just my development of who I am today as an adult. As I stated earlier in the presentation, we were not very close to my father's side of the family. When my father decided to go the educational route versus going straight into a job, he was abandoned by his parents. So that kind of set the tone for our interactions with them. My brother and I are actually the only college graduates from that side of the family. Because we chose to follow in our father's footsteps, we're viewed very differently than the other grandchildren on that side of the family. So a lot of things that they were taught, we were not taught. So it was my mother's side of the family who instilled most of our values and our teachings into us. My religious views are also very important to who I am today. I grew up in a Christian household, so the love of God, being kind to others, just spreading the word of God is very important to who I am and who I strive to be going forward in life. Another thing that I reflected on is just having to manage 2 different Christian denominations in my house. My father was African Methodist Episcopal, and my mother was Apostolic. And although they are both under the Christian umbrella, they both function very different. They both operate very different. So there was a lot of religious conflict in my household. So my father, who was AME, looked at the Apostolic Church as a cult. So when we reached a certain age, it left my brother and I in the middle, and eventually we just had to choose. So when it came to defining our own religious identities, my brother actually left the church and he never returned to the church. I also left the church but returned later on in college. Instead, I did not return to the AME church, and I did not return to the Apostolic Church. I actually joined a non-denominational church, which is where I am a member of today. Because of my cultural background, I believe that I would work most effectively with minority populations, specifically in the African American community. I have an extensive knowledge on issues of racism and oppressions, and I'm very knowledgeable on the cultural strengths of minority families. Another key point of my professional impact is my religious teachings and guidings. I have the desire to help others and do so and spread the love of God. So that pushes me towards wanting to even join the field of clinical mental health counseling. I also have a great knowledge of minority discomfort and distrust in counseling, so I would be able to work from a place of understanding and work as an advocate for mental health care in the African American community.